My name is Amalia Weber. I'm the program specialist here at Rochester Hills Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Smart Towns program, The Man Who Never Was. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, this program will be recorded and available to view about 1 week from tonight on our YouTube page and on the RHPL website shortly after. We ask that audience members please silence or turn off their cell phones before we begin in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation. Our next program is D-Day Revisited, 80 Years Later, also presented with Smart Towns, which will be an in-person event on Thursday, June 6th at 7 p.m. You can sign up for that at calendar.rhpl.org. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with Smart Towns, a lifelong learning program for everyone in the community, led by education organizations in Rochester, Rochester Hills, and Oakland Township, Michigan. Smart Towns offers lectures, presentations, and courses that introduce the participants to all aspects of the topic and are presented by experts in their respected fields of study. Now, without further ado, please welcome our presenter, Frank Cardeman.
Well, good evening. I'm happy to be with you. I think I've seen a few faces before in my previous presentations, so I'm delighted to be back with you. As I've always shared with my group before, I've never been in the military, but I've been a military historian for over 60 years. The story tonight is one of my fun stories, and I just get a big kick out of it because it was a 1 in a million shot, and the bloody thing worked. The story is about Operation Mincemeat, which was the name of the plan for the invasion of Sicily. And along with it came a deception plan. It was called The Man Who Never Was. Here's a copy of the book. And in the back of the book it says, near the end of World War II, 2 British naval officers came up with a brilliant and slightly mad scheme to mislead the Nazi armies about where the Allies would attack southern Europe. To carry out the plan, they would have to rely on the most unlikely of secret agents, a dead man. That's what the story is about today. So let me take you back, okay? And let's see if I can do that. I have to take you back. He said near the end of World War II. It was 2 years and a month before the war ended. But I got to take you back to 1943 when Patton took over the U.S. military in Northern Africa. And he became the leading American general to lead the men into Sicily. And so I have to take you back even further than that because I want to take you to the point of 1939, September 1 was the invasion. That's when the war started. In 1940, Germany invades the lowlands, Dunkirk retreat, the Battle of Britain. Germany takes over all of Europe, mainland Europe, with the exception of Switzerland, okay, and Spain. In 41, Rommel has his group in northern Africa trying to protect the Italians who really screwed up in Ethiopia and got into big battles with the British and eventually had to move out because the Allies won that battle. Germany invades Russia in June of 41. British counterattacks in Africa, and December 7 is when we officially got into the war. Okay? Now on December 11, Hitler declared war on the United States. And that was his first mistake. But we did not declare war on Hitler to start with. He declared war on us, and we then decided, okay, we got to join the Brits and fight this battle out. So in 1942, the U.S. enters World War II campaign through Africa. The history tells us that there was a big argument over whether or not there should be an Allied force going up through southern Europe. The Americans wanted to save all of their military and their equipment for a major landing in Europe, D-Day, and did not want to break up that. Russia, who was an ally of ours, was getting hammered like hell by the Germans. And they were asking not only for equipment, but they were asking for help. They said, you got to give us a second front. You got to get the Germans away from us and give us a little breathing room. And it was Churchill who talked about the underbelly of Europe and decided that, yes, we should go in through Sicily and through Italy. And they did. So in 1943, in January, the plans began for Europe's underbelly. January through April, the whole operation called Operation Mincemeat, the deception for the invasion plan called Husky, took place. That's what this guy, Ben McIntyre, wrote about. In May, Germany surrenders in Africa. In July, they're at a major of the largest tank battle in the war, and one of the largest tank battles ever to be fought in Kursk. And in July, Rommel was sent to Greece to defend the invasion. They bought the deception plan called Operation Mincemeat. In July 10 to August 17, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. That's the history of when this guy takes over in 1943. Okay? When he took over, what is that? Okay, the font came out a little bit different than I was used to. In 43, Patton was given command of 2 corps, writing in his diary, "Well, it has taken over rather a mess, but I will make a go of it." The troops were poorly trained, they were poorly equipped, they had no previous leadership, and they got really destroyed at one of the battles before Patton came in and took over. Patton's ranks grows because he then fought back and defeated one of Rommel's groups before Rommel left Africa. He took over the ranks in 43, was promoted to lieutenant general to lead the U.S. 7th Army into Sicily. He now had 3 stars at this point. The discipline set in. I think it's interesting to read what Patton had done. He took over a soldier, remembered his initial encounter with the legendary General Patton. "Every man old enough will shave every day. Officers will wear ties in combat." And then he came up about a foot in front of my face and he said, "Anyone wearing a wool knit cap without a steel helmet will be shot." That was Patton. Now I'll tell you more stories about Patton and my uncle a little bit later. Okay. So he defeated the Germans at the Battle of El Gatar, and therefore was ready to take on the next battle for the U.S. 7th Army, and it was going to be Sicily. But, Keep talking, okay. But what happened was the British decided to come up with some sort of scheme to try and deceive the Germans. The Germans seem to have been receptive to these devious schemes that the British had. The Germans fell to a deception plan over Montgomery's battle at Tobruk, Northern Africa. They fell to a certain plan where we convinced the Germans that, in fact, we were going to go into Sicily, and we told them we weren't. We were going to go into Greece, and we were going into Sardinia. And later on, in D-Day, which you could hear next week, you will hear also that, in fact, one of the main reasons the D-Day worked was the deception plan called Fortitude, where one of the double agents convinced Hitler that Normandy was not the invasion, it was Calais. And the story behind that is an incredible story. Okay, so back to Northern Africa. The Allies had just defeated the Germans. The Desert Fox, as he was called, was shipped back to Germany. And the Allies had control of northern Africa through here, all the way down like this, and through Tunisia. So that was all Allied control at that point. Now the question was, if they're going to go into the underbelly of Europe, where do they go? They go to Sardinia, they go to Sicily, do they go to Greece? And in June 1040 to 13 May, 2 years, 11 months, and 3 days, Africa war ended, Germans defeated. Where in the hell was the underbelly? It was going to be Sicily, but the Brits had a game plan. And in the back of their minds, because they had been in so many wars over the last 600-700 years, 1,000 years probably, they always believed this great saying, all warfare is based on deception. How do you get your enemy to believe you're going to do one thing when in fact you're going to do another? So here's the story. How a dead man in a bizarre plan foiled the Nazis and assured Allied victory in Sicily in 1943. And Winston Churchill's comment was, "Who in war will not have the laugh amid the spoils?" That was his belief and his conclusion after he learned, in fact, that the Germans bit on this particular ploy. In 1954, a book was written by Ewan Montague, who was the key player in this whole campaign. And he wrote the book about that guy over there who was the dead man. But he never identified who the dead man was until most recent years. So they didn't know, or we didn't know for many, many years. So MI6 had some successes with deception. I mentioned a couple of them already, and even some more later on. But this plan was put together for the Double Cross Committee. That's a double X. Double Cross Committee was set up by Churchill. He had the final authority on it. And he heard about this plan, and he said, in wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies, which is, again, the same theory of deception. How do we get the enemy to think it's different than where we're going? So now we're down here to where we have the invasion of Sicily, and now we have the conditions of an invasion. Okay, here's the northern part of Africa. The Allies had major forces at Oran, over here at near Algiers, and also at Tunis. And they all wanted to make the Germans believe it would be Sardinia, when in fact it was going to be in Sicily. Now, I put this map up here because of Spain. Spain was neutral through the war. Both the Germans and the Allies wanted Spain to be on their side, but they stayed neutral, even though the Spanish were helped by Hitler a number of times, but they wanted to stay neutral. And what happened was Spain became one of those areas where all of the, what do I want to call it? All of the double agents, all of the agents from all the countries were. And they all knew each other. And it was all a place where they talked about espionage and all kind of stuff. So Spain was one of these places where the Brits had a number of key double agents down there that worked for them against the Germans. So here we go. Let me see if I can. This map isn't so good. It's not. Here we are in northern Africa, this line right through here again, okay? And here's Sicily, and this is the Bay of Gela. And here is Sardinia, and here is Greece. Greece, fake invasion under command of General Henry Wilson. Sardinia, fake invasion, code name Operation Brimstone, preparatory to invasion South Africa. And in fact, the real invasion was landed on 26 beaches along 100 miles of Sicily's south coast, right in here. And in here, my uncle landed with Patton in the Bay of Gela. And I'll tell you about him later. So, here is the plan. The plan is simple. Deceive the Germans that invasion in southern Europe would be in Sardinia and Greece, not Sicily. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, you can use a dead corpse to float ashore in Spain with documents for a commanding general in Africa that tells the Allied and European invasion will be in Sardinia and Greece, not Sicily. And get the Germans to buy into this deception if they get their hands on it, and go back and tell the Germans in Berlin that in fact it is going to be a deception, that it's going to be Sardinia or Greece, not Sicily, and get them to buy into it. Now, the plan was conceived by a writer and a fisherman. Here's the requirements for this operation to work. And this is the one that just blows me out of the water, okay? I mean, you need a corpse, first thing. Then you need a coroner to support the corpse for 4 months. Then you need a pathologist to make sure the corpse looks like he died from drowning when in fact he died from rat poisoning, okay? Then you need a special designer to provide a container for this guy. Then you need the identity for a corpse. You had to give him an identity, and you had to create enough information about who this person was, his lover, his family, and all that good information. It was a whole scheme. Then you had convincing documents from hotels and restaurants. Then you needed a submarine. The original plan was to drop him by plane, and they decided against that at the end. So they took him down from Scotland all the way down to the south of Spain and dropped him off in the water. Then you had to have proper tides and winds to make sure the bloody dead person floated up on shore, okay? Then you had to have the corpse off in the ocean, proper spot, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that it would be picked up by a German agent or even a Spanish agent, who would then be tied to the Germans so much that the Spanish would give the information to the Germans, who would then believe it and travel all the way up to Berlin to get them to be convinced that in fact the invasion is not going to be Sicily. Then you need the Spanish authorities to autopsy the body incorrectly. When they autopsied the body, they concluded death by drowning. Oh, you need the Spanish to sympathize with Germany, deliver the documents. You need the Germans to buy into deception and communicate to Germany and to Berlin. And you needed the German headquarters to accept the ruse and reposition its forces to Greece and southern France. Simple plan, and a few people must know. Now, I want you to just think about that a second. Think about the odds of that working. Okay, but it did. Here's even Montague. He's the one that wrote a book in 1954, The Man Who Never Was. And he never revealed the identity of the corpse until recent years. I think it was 87 or 88. I forget when it was. He was a naval intelligence officer. He was a lawyer, an angler, and a principal organizer of Operation Mincemeat, member of the 20 Committee, a fisherman. And he got final approval from Winston Churchill to prove it. This was his cohort in crime. Any Britons in here? Any Brits? Oh. For years, I've been calling this guy Charles Comondele. Pretty reasonable? That's not bad, is it? I call him Comondele. This presentation I made about 6 months ago got on YouTube, and a fellow from Cambridge, United Kingdom, got it. And he saw where we were naming this guy Comondele. And he wrote me a letter back, or an email, and he said, Frank, I just want you to know we speak the same language, but we really don't. Okay. He said, the guy's name is not Comondele, it's Chumley. Well, how the hell do you get Chumley out of that name? He says, that's the Brits. His name is Chumley. I don't know how to do it, but that was it. So I'm going to call him Chumley from now on because it's easier. So Chumley was an officer with a crazy mindset. And between him and Montague, they came up with this whole plan that Churchill approved. And the proof says, we'll obtain a body from a London hospital, dress it up in a military uniform, fill the corpse lung with water, provide it with misleading documents, and then drop it from an aircraft, that's the change they made, so that it will wash up on the coast of Spain. After all, live agents could be tortured, a corpse would never confess. That was their theory. Now, did anybody see the recent movie called Operation Mincemeat? Yeah. To me, that was just not a very good movie, because I don't think it took in, first of all, it didn't tell you what happened at the end, and second of all, it didn't tell you how screwy this damn plan was that had a chance of never working. So here is the man who never was. He was born in 1909 in South Wales. His father was a coal miner. His mother and father were never married. Mother had syphilis prior to his birth. Father died of TB. Lived on charity with mother and 3 siblings. Was not eligible for military service. His mother died in 1940. He moved to London. He was a vagrant, and he had a great deal of mental illness. He ingested rat poison, assumed suicide, found in an abandoned warehouse near King's Cross in London. He died on January 28, 43 in St. Pancras Hospital, and he was kept frozen and secret until April 43. That's who the guy was. Died of rat poison, affected liver and caused fluid to build up in its lungs, consistent with death at sea unless the autopsy was done with advanced science, which the Spanish did not have. So when they did the autopsy, they came up with the idea that in fact it was drowning. The corpse's new identity. They gave him a new identity of William Martin. Provided him with a family, conflict with a father, he was a Marine regiment, contact with a bank manager, he was a solicitor, he had a smoking habit, he had a religion, Roman Catholic. The corpse was the same size as Chumley. He began wearing the uniform of the Royal Marines that would dress the corpse in so the uniform would look suitably worn, including underwear. That's the detail they went to try and make this guy legitimate. This guy over here, Ronnie Reed, looked very much like him, so they used his picture on a document. And in doing so, they put him in the Royal Marines. He appeared to look like his twin brother, and what else is there? And the card was found on his body when the Spanish picked him up. Now, here's the coroner and the pathologist. Bernard Spilsity, Bentley Purchase. Both were approached by Churchill and told to be quiet about it, and had to keep this guy frozen for 4 months, and nobody had to know about it. Task was find a body no one would claim that would appear as if drowned, keep it frozen out of sight of other medical officials for 4 months. That was the objective. Here's the guy, Charles Fraser Smith. He was the inventor who designed the canister to transport the body. They had to, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Jane Leslie was the secretary to Montague. Her pictures were used as William Martin's lover, okay? And they wrote letters and put on this guy when they dropped him in the water. And the love letters were written by 2 female employees working for Montague. Here's the commander of the submarine. His name was Norman Bill Jewell, HMS Seraph. And in 1942, I talk about this because he's an important character in this whole thing. He delivered General Mark Clark to Algeria, and that's important because Mark Clark took over from Patton after Patton slapped those 2 kids in Sicily. In 1943, he delivered the cargo, Operation Mincemeat, and he told his staff and his people that it was an optical weather device, okay? They dropped in the water. And then in the invasion of Sicily, his submarine led the entire military, naval ships. And as an additional thing, the HMS Seraph arrived in the U.S. at Charleston at the Citadel University there. And it is the only place where a Royal Navy ensign allowed to fly in the United States. That's the model there. The reason for that is Mark Clark, after he left the military, left the field commander position, became president of the Citadel, and he liked what this guy had done for him, so he brought that to the Citadel. Okay, now we got to talk about the Germans. Major Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, head of the Abwehr's espionage section in Spain. He was a Jew among anti-Semite killers. He wanted to believe the documents, and he traveled to Germany to plead his case, not Sicily. Adolf Klaus, senior officer, Huelva, William Leisner, alias Gustav Lenz, codename Heidelberg, head of the military intelligence in Spain. Here is the letter that was put on William Martin when he fell into the water. And the letter reads basically, I'm here to tell you that this man that is delivering this is a good man, and he's going to need to come back as quickly as possible. And the last paragraph is, let me have him back, please, as soon as possible, as soon as the assault is over. He might bring some sardines with him here, or something like that. On points here, yeah. So they made the reference in the letter that it could be Sardinia. And that's what the Germans picked up on. Now, the letter came from Louis Mountbatten, Command Operations in London, and was going to the Admiral of the Fleet, Cunningham, in Algiers. And their whole game plan was that his plane went down just before it got to Africa, and his body washed up on shore so that the Spanish should get it, then the Germans could get it, then the Germans could go to Germany, and they could make the change. Here was a checklist of items on the corpse. They had broken it down into very, very detailed analysis of what was going to be on that person. And in all the documents that they enclosed the letters, they had a type of seal that they could tell if it was broken. So when it got back to them 20 days later, they were able to tell that it was looked at. Here was one of the letters from Pam, from the Manor House. Oh, she's just, Bill, darling, do this, as soon as you get here, kiss me, and all that kind of good stuff. All my love, Pam, okay? Beautiful love letter from Pam. Here was a letter from his father, who was complaining about something and talking to him about something else. These were written by two women in Montague's office. So here's how Operation Mincemeat was implanted. The canister was filled with dry ice. When evaporated, it created carbon dioxide and drove out any oxygen, preserving the body without refrigeration. So that had to be done in such a way to make sure that the body wasn't deteriorating. So if you can take a look at this, his body was over here in South Wales. They took him to London, and then the two of them, these two, took him up to Scotland, where he got on the submarine, HMS Seraph, and he came all the way down, which was very dangerous because these waters were infested by German submarines. So they had to avoid the submarines as well. And they got down here, and they dropped this guy off, and the winds and the waters and everything worked, and he washed up on shore. Now, from that point on, 7 or 8 days later, Madrid had the letters, I can't read it myself here, extracted from the envelope and gave to the Abwehr. Okay, yeah, the Germans. And then the Germans flew up to Berlin to convince Berlin that, in fact, the Allies were going to invade southern Europe through either Sardinia or Greece. And we ought to put our men there, not Sicily, which is exactly what they did. Now, when the Seraph, Bill Jewell, dropped the corpse into the ocean, he read the 39th Psalm. And everybody was a little bit surprised at why, but we'll see in a minute. So here again is the area we're at here, southern part of Spain. Here's Huelva, and here's the coast. So somehow that body had to be dropped somewhere in there, and it was allowed to go up through here to be captured. And I'm not sure if it was on this side or this side where they captured it. I don't remember. So what happened when the corpse landed in Spain, April 30th? Well, at 4:30 in the morning, the corpse set ashore from HMS Seraph, suited with life jacket, briefcase, attached to his belt by a steel cord, okay? At 9:30, 5 hours later, somehow this corpse washed ashore and found a local fisherman who turned the corpse over to the local Spanish government. Next day, an autopsy conclusion, drowning at sea, 8 to 10 days. British notified Spain of a downed pilot, acknowledged and given him a military funeral, burial in Huelva. British dignitaries attended. British urgent request that the documents be returned immediately, and after many days, 3 weeks, May 21, they got the documents back. So, in the newspaper, back in London, I don't know if you can't read it very well, but right here, it says Royal Marines killed TC Major William Martin. They published it in the London Times, that in fact this guy was dead. It was an officer of the military. And the death certificate in Spain read, W. Martin, age between 35 and 40, native of Cardiff, England, officer of the British Marines, found on the beach known as La Bota at 9:30 on April 30th, death by drowning. This was the British gravesite that they had a ceremony for. British dignitaries were there, Spanish dignitaries were there, and they all presented him with the final rites and everything. And they just said, rest in peace. That was it. No name, Bill Martin. That's who it was. Sequence of later events, Spanish and the Germans. On April 30, Adolf Klaus and Blumenthal and other high German intelligence officers on the Iberian Peninsula and Berlin learned of the briefcase, were desperate to see the contents. By May 8, 9 days later, the fake letters landed in the Germans' lap by this lieutenant colonel of the Spanish staff officer, an informant and German sympathizer. Now, the British only learned about that person 2 years after the fact, but they found that it was that guy who gave the information to the Germans. On May 9th, Kuhlenthal made copies of the documents, handed over the letters to Leisner, head of the Abwehr, and then Karl Kuhlenthal personally delivered them to Berlin to Colonel Alexis Baron von Rohn, one of Hitler's most trusted intelligence officers. At which point, it is uncertain whether Rohn knew about the deception or whether he was going to just let it go. And a lot of people believe that he let it go knowing that it was a deception. And von Rohn was executed on 12 October because of the plot of July 20th. I don't know if you remember that. July 20th, at one of the headquarters in Prussia, I can't remember the guy's name, Stauffenberg. Stauffenberg put a package under the big table that Hitler was talking at, and somebody moved it just enough in front of a big post that saved Hitler's life, killed 5 other people. And he came out of it with just some little damage in the eyes. His hand was shaking. He had a little bad back, but he was okay. In fact, that afternoon on July 20th, he met Mussolini at the train station, okay? Anyhow, no one is positive about whether von Rohn really knew that it was a fake or if it was believed. But what he did is he allowed it to go forward as a belief that in fact the invasion would be in Greece and or Sardinia. May 10, Spain turned over the documents to the British. May 21, the documents returned to London to be microscopically evaluated, sealed and folded the envelopes by the British intelligence. Documents were tampered, mincemeat swallowed whole. Okay, so now, we're back to what had to happen. All of this happened. Need Germany to accept the ruse and reposition its forces to Greece and southern France. Would they bite? I've spoken here before in Bletchley Park, which was the deception, not the deception area, was the intelligence area where Turing and his team broke the German Enigma code. And 3 days later, Bletchley decoded a German message on May 11th, okay, which is 11 days later, that the invasion will be in Greece and Sardinia. Sicily is a diversion. Morgenthau, not aware of Bletchley, didn't learn about the Germans taking the bait until after the war, and knew nothing about it until after the war. Winston Churchill, on the day the Germans took the bait, said, "Mincemeat swallowed, rod, line, and sinker." And then he said, that's not it yet. Okay, so in addition to General Henry in Greece, Rommel was also sent down there to take a lot of military away from Russia where they needed the people. So Germany made all the moves. 3 Panzer divisions went to Greece, 1 from France, 2 from Eastern Front and Russia, reducing the needed force. 2 weeks later, the Germans remained convinced that the Allies would come from Greece and Sardinia. Operation Husky, July 10, August 23. Everybody fool would know the American and Britain would attack Sicily. That's what he said to his group on the 11th when the code was broken. You have to remember, the Enigma code was only broken with about 3 to 5 people who knew it existed. And every day, the breaking of the code at Bletchley was sent to London, to Churchill, in a little brown box called Boniface. There was only one key to that box. Churchill had the key, okay? So in that message, he found that, in fact, the Germans bit on this ruse. The Sicilian campaign. Okay, so they moved on into this area here, and the British were here, the Americans were here, and this blue line was the path that Montgomery was to take to Messina, which is the most northern point on the edge of the coast to Italy. And the game plan was for Patton to follow on the other side of the mountain, because this is where Mount Etna is right here, okay, the huge mountain. He was to follow Montgomery over here like this and then protect his flank. No. Patton said, we're going to have this an American-style event. And he took his group all the way this way, went up to Palermo and also to this little town here, which I can't remember it is. Then he had an amphibious assault around the Germans to here, and he got into Messina about 3 to 4 hours before Montgomery got there. Now, many of you have seen the movies and all that good stuff when he's standing there and Montgomery's group comes in. Well, that was a big, big fight that continued on in the war between the Brits and the Americans. But Patton didn't care. He was pretty excited he was able to do that because he was looking to take out more Germans, and when we were done with the Germans, he wanted to go to Japan, kill all the Japs. Okay? That was his whole attitude. However, what happened? Wins the battle in Sicily. He goes to a couple Red Cross hospitals, field hospitals. And there he's pinning on medals to guys that had their heads blown off and legs and arms, and he was just emotional. And there's this one guy, I have his name, I don't have it with me today. Should have had that for you. But anyhow, this one guy's down at the end of the room, and he's just shivering all over. And Patton went up to him, slapped him across the face. He said, I don't want any cowards in my army. You're going to go back to the front whether you're scared or not. I just can't take it anymore. I can't. Well, Patton didn't know much about battlefield conditions and the effect of battlefield conditions. He thought he was a coward, and Patton wanted to straighten him up. So he slapped him across, and he grabbed for his gun The nurses and doctors had to grab him. He was going to shoot the guy. That's how emotional he was. And he did it to a second hospital. 2 guys. Both of them forgave Patton when it was over. But the feedback that came into America was so great that Marshall told Eisenhower, it's your call. If you want him to come back, we'll bring him back right now. And Eisenhower made one of the greatest moves, I think, in the war, in that he pulled him out of Sicily, didn't allow him to fight in Italy, and turned him into a ruse. And in D-Day, just before D-Day, he was in charge of the 1st U.S. Army Group, which was right across from Calais. It was supposed to be 100,000 men, guns, ships, tanks, all kinds of stuff. All of the equipment was rubber. He was the only member of the fuselage. And they allowed the Germans to take pictures, thinking that Patton would be the one to lead the group into Calais, because the Germans were convinced that the only real military leader, real vicious leader, was Patton. And they had their eyes on, no matter where he was, that's who they were going to follow. And to Eisenhower's credit, he used him as a ruse until about 20 days after D-Day, he gives them the 3rd Army, and they start opening up wide and going across France. Every year in April, an Englishman from the town of Huelva lays flowers on the gravestone. In 1997, the man who never was became known. I said 87, it was 97. His name was Glendear Michael, served as Major William Martin. His grave in Huelva today is now with his real name on it. They found a couple members of his family afterwards, and they gave him great honors and awards for what he had done, not knowing anything about it, because he died of rat poisoning, And yet he was a hero in this whole thing. The man who never was. Flowers left for William Martin. Recent note from one: you served up the mincemeat cold, and they swallowed it whole. In Psalm 39, I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So I remained utterly silent, not even saying anything good. Sicily casualty. This was Patton's future role in fortitude. This was the slapping of the face. And then not only did we take over Sicily, but then we moved on to Salerno, which is right here, moved up to Naples. Here's Naples. Moved up to Anzio, and finally got to Rome on June 4, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. And on June 5, there was a parade in Rome, and the general was believing that he was the new Caesar conquering Rome, and the next day he said, can you believe I only had 1 day of glory? Because the next day was D-Day, June 6th. When I did research for my uncle, or about my uncle, he had a postcard in his box, a box of stuff that was unbelievable stuff. And I did about a year's worth of research on his division and his unit. And there was a postcard in there dated June 6, 1944. And he was in the little town of Civitavecchia, which is the seaport town of Rome. And he was there, and he wrote this postcard to his brother saying, how are you? And saying, had a pretty good day today, captured a German officer, and then I have all of the officers' pictures and information. So we knew where he was. I knew where my uncle was almost throughout his whole war and in the days that he went there. And he ended up in Dachau on April 3, May 3, April 29. The 159th entered Dachau. He got there on May 3. After the Sicily campaign, Italy shuns Germany as an ally. Italy declares war on Germany. It was October 13, 1943. So the Italians reversed themselves. Said, we're no longer allies with the Germans, we're now allies with the US. But the Germans had a lot of military power in Italy and had some great defensive lines across the country with the mountains and everything. And they were able to do a lot of damage to the Allies. The Husky operation, the Allies had about 25,000, we're not quite sure, but it was about 150 to 160,000 Germans and Italians that were killed. Great German retreat through Messina saved many more Germans before Patton and Montgomery reached Messina. The German commandant, if you will, the leader, did a masterful defensive maneuver to get his men back to Messina and get them back into Italy to be able to be used against the Allies in mainland Italy. Did a great job. So, how a dead man and a bizarre plan foiled the Nazis in a short Allied victory in Sicily in 1943. When they got to Sicily, there were Germans there. There weren't as many as they thought would have been there if they had been defended. And they were able to do quite a bit of damage to them, as you could see with the numbers. But Montgomery, going up on the east side, all the way by the Mount Etna, took a great deal of beating because the Germans were in the high ground in there and really took a beating. Patton just went bat like a hell across the northern part of the country to Palermo and then started moving across to Messina. So the deception worked. Thousands of Allied soldiers saved in Sicily, and deception would work again D-Day, June 6, 1944. And that's a story really about next week. Mincemeat worked with help from the man who never was, Glenn Will Michaels. Thank you. There was one other thing I was going to share with you, since we have a few extra. Oh, first of all, any questions? Yes?
I'm wondering why the Germans fell for the D-Day invasion shortly after.
They never knew that. They didn't know about they didn't know about that until after the war was over.
So it didn't come out.
Yeah, they didn't know that. And in the D-Day invasion, there were 2 or 3 things that were really prominent. There were 2 double agents. One was Garbo, one was Tricycle. But Garbo was the one that convinced Hitler that the invasion would be in Calais, not Normandy. And on the day of the invasion, he notifies Germany, there's an invasion going on in Normandy. Don't bite. The real invasion will come in Calais. And Germany kept the 15th Division there for about 3 to 4 weeks. Had they moved onto Normandy, the short distance from Calais to Normandy, there are people who really believe we could have been stifled right there at the beaches, okay? And the deception worked there again. The Germans were very receptive to a lot of the deception plans. And story about my uncle in Normandy. I don't think anybody in here was in World War II, I don't think. Anybody? No. Any military people here? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your service. I was 17, and I just wrote a book about Patton. And my uncle, who had gone through hell, there was no way he should have lived through what he went through. No way. There were only like 4 or 5 men from his company that survived. And he wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't talk about anything. And during sleeping, during the evenings, my aunt would say he would be up screaming, just yelling and screaming like a wild man. And he couldn't talk about it. But here I am, 17, ignorant, not knowing a great deal, but I read this book about Patton. And there he is. I can see him sitting there in front of the window at breakfast this one day. I walk in on him. And I said, Uncle Joe, I got to tell you something. I just read a book about this great general we had in the U.S. Army. I said, his name was General Patton. And I said, he was one of the greatest, blah, 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 blah. And he just looked at me with a shit-eating grin. And he said, you mean old blood and guts? Yeah. And I thought, well, how does he know that? It wasn't until 2012, and he died when he was 56. In 2012 is when I did this research for my aunt and my two cousins. What I found was he was under Patton's control going into Sicily and was part of the whole Patton movement that went up to Palermo and over to Messina, because I had postcards from every one of the cities he went to. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, I wish I could talk to him now. And that was the same story of so many of the soldiers in the wars, your family members and others. They didn't talk about it. And there are so many incredible stories that were left untold by these people who went through such hell in that war. But I was able to pull out what he had gone through for my aunt. I'll tell you two quick things about that also. When they into Salerno, they got into a real battle in Salerno, and to get up to Naples with the rain and the mud and everything else was just horrendous. But they got up there and the weather became so bad that the war ended for about 30, 60 days, okay, with the Germans and Americans. So he got a little bit of reprieve. But while there, what we found out was that he saved or helped save the life of a child. And the reason we know that is the parents gave him a gift. And in the gift, the Americans wrote from the Italians a little note that says, we don't have anything of any value. This is all we have. And in a little tin box about this big is a bracelet. And in the bracelet are 12 little receptors of stones. Each one of those stones was from Mount Vesuvius eruptions that went back to the 14th century. And they were all different colors. And my aunt had no knowledge of it. My cousins had no knowledge. I said, do you realize how valuable this is? Let me get it appraised. They didn't want me to. It's still in the box. I just wrote to them 2 days ago, asked them if they did anything with it. The second thing was when he got to Dachau. The 45th Division, 159th, got there first on April 29th and liberated Dachau. And there was the Americans were so upset with what they saw, they started killing all the Germans. And in fact, they were going to have a court-martial, and Patton said, no way. But on the 3rd, on May 3rd, I have a picture of my uncle there, a picture of the crematoria that he wrote on May 3, 1945, 45. And I know he was there. I also know he was there because he was given a gift by one of the inmates. It's a little purse, human skin. And I told my cousin and my aunt, I says, you can't keep this. You got to get this to a museum. I said, this is part of history. You can't hold on to this. It's still there. I have work to do. Anyhow, I say that because so many of our soldiers had gone through so much, and the stories have not all been told. But I was able to tell his. And I've been able to tell this story, which is one of the most unique stories of how they were able to convince the Germans. Now, when Montague and, I don't know if Chumley was with him at Berlin after the war, and he went through their archive, when he learned that in fact the documents showed that Berlin was convinced that the invasion would be in Greece and Sardinia. That's when he learned about it. Churchill knew 11 days later from the Germans, but he couldn't tell anybody. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Given how there never seems to be any secrets anymore. And I'm not saying there aren't, but do you think something like this would be possible if we were to enter another world type war?
You know, I don't know how to answer that, because another world war is not going to be like this world war, where you had field battles and sea battles. It's all going to be with stuff up in the air. You know, it's going to be different. Could there be deceptions? Yeah. Would there try to be deceptions? Yes. I'm sure of that. Would they be receptive? I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. Yes, sir.
A question. There's one soldier, our agent,
Yeah?
Kuhlenthal.
Yeah.
Was he Jewish?
He was.
How did he make?
Yeah, how did he survive?
He either hit it or
Become part of the hierarchy?
he hit it. But you know, this guy, Heydrich, Reinhard Heydrich, who was the number 3 guy in the German military to Hitler before he was assassinated in Prague. He also had about an eighth Jewish in his body. But he was so good and so evil and so good for Hitler and killing people that Hitler decided to overcome it. Say, it's okay. It's only an eighth. So,
Hitler might have been a quarter Jewish himself.
pardon?
Hitler might have been a quarter Jewish himself.
That's exactly right. There's a possibility of that. Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Why did it take so long to identify the thing? Why was that information
Why?
identified?
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I mean, you would think that after the war they could have immediately identified them, but I guess they wanted to keep it quiet for a longer period of time. It was just like Bletchley. When the war ended, at Bletchley, everything was told to be burned. The equipment was told to be torn down and burned, and all of them had to sign a document that for 50 years that they couldn't say anything to anybody. To anybody. And they did it. And you say, well, why did they do that? Well, one of the reasons was that Russia was in World War II, but we knew we were going to get into a Cold War with Russia, and we didn't want Russia to know what had been happening at Bletchley. They knew, even though they knew. Thanks, guys, for coming. Oh, I wanted to show you. That's the next Thursday. That's what we'll see next Thursday, the D-Day anniversary. And that's 4 hours. So,
What time?
7, same. Yeah. Anything else? Thanks for coming, guys.